I'm super excited and so grateful that you're here. I started this podcast so we could have some conversations that would hopefully help turn the messy into healing. If that idea sounds good to you, you must be a pathfinder too. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to Talks Too Much with Jill Castle. This is my first episode in the first series. The first series is about finding joy in the messy middle. And we're going to have 3 episodes. The first episode is myself, just to give you some background and explain why I launched into this crazy project. And the second episode will be called Beyond the Bubble Bath, and that is going to include a good dear friend of mine who's a therapist who's going to talk about self-abandonment and how to take care of yourself, and not the corny self-care bubble bath pedicure thing, but like some real tricks, and have a real conversation about that. And then the third episode is going to be a therapist who is phenomenal. She is actually a therapist for therapists, and she has taught me so much about trauma and what that really means. That word is just so overused in our society, and people just kind of roll their eyes when they hear that word. But in my world, in my community, it is really common, and being having a behaviorist background like I do, I see behaviors that have an explanation to them that aligns with trauma. And when I personally was able to admit that, I was able to start getting real help and start making real changes. So again, welcome to Talks Too Much. For those of you who know my background, you can skip through this. This might be kind of boring. But for many of you out there that don't know, I guess what I'll start with is one of the reasons that I'm going to do this podcast is because I have spent the last 20 years helping families with kiddos who have disabilities, chronic illnesses, learning differences, neurodivergent, whatever you want to call it, rare disease. There's a whole spectrum of kiddos and families that fall into a different than norm. And after doing this for 20 years, I don't even know what normal is anymore. I don't meet a lot of people really that I would qualify as having a normal, simple life. So I think that some of the things that we're going to talk about on this podcast personally are going to apply to everybody, but I guess you guys will determine that. Anyway, I've spent 20 years helping families, and a lot of times I'm doing one-to-one help, and I'm working with families individually. And I just felt like as I'm getting older and as I'm thinking about perhaps not being involved in working the way that I do now forever, it might be best if I found a platform where we could have these discussions in a bigger setting so that we could help each other, not just me helping someone, and also we could help more people at a time. So that's how this happened. The reason it's called Talks Too Much is because I grew up with ADHD, and since I'm in an older generation, I'm in the Gen X generation, we did not really know what that was, and women certainly didn't have it, or girls at that time didn't have it. So instead of realizing that's what I had, it showed up for me as talking too much and a lot of anxious energy that I really didn't know what to do with. And back then, there wasn't a focus on anxiety. There wasn't the detection of those types of behaviors. So I was just told I talk too much all the time. And it became kind of a really sensitive, shameful thing because it was on every report card, which I got in a lot of trouble for all the time. And it actually hurt my connections with people rather than what I was seeking to do, which was feel more connected to others, since I felt a little disconnected from the start. And so it just became this really difficult thing for me. And as I grew and went through my life and things started happening and changing, my talking ended up working in my favor. So I named the podcast Talks Too Much, sort of in a way of embracing the messy, embracing myself wholly for who I really am, and being okay with that, and realizing that there's pros and cons for everything, and that I'm really no better or no less than anyone else. And it took me a long time to learn that. So I kind of wanted to just put it out there and call it what it was. So it's Talks Too Much, Turning Struggles into Strengths. For those who know me now, you know that one of the ways that I got into this world was when my firstborn, Anthony, Anthony was about 3 years old, and Oliver was 1. And Anthony had had a lot of challenges talking. So he was 3 and he wasn't really speaking a whole lot yet. I kept seeing pediatricians and they kept saying, oh, they're boys, they all catch up at 3. And I kept being told that and being dismissed. Also, he struggled to alternate feet on steps. He had trouble even doing steps. He would fall down a lot. I remember when he was 6 months old, he would just be sitting up and he would just, for no reason, just tip over and tip backwards and smack his head on our hardwood floors. And it was horrifying. He was my first kid. I didn't know any better. So I started to look for answers, but I got dismissed a lot. I got dismissed as a crazy mom. And so, of course, deep down, I wanted everything to be normal. So I was okay with just waiting and hoping things would get better. I had my other child, and he was running and moving and talking and doing everything at just this really quick speed. So it made it even more obvious that there were issues with Anthony. I remember the pediatrician said, if he doesn't walk before 2, let us know. And he walked like a week before his second birthday. So he kept just barely making the milestones. So I didn't know. At 3, we took him into a clinic because he wasn't really talking, and we thought maybe he had autism. And one of the physical therapists in the evaluation clinic saw how he got up off the floor and he kind of climbed up his body with his hands. They call that Gower's maneuver. And so they decided to do a blood test. They didn't tell us why. Um, and I remember seeing a paper laying on the table when they left the room. And I saw Gower's maneuver. And out of all the evaluation conversation on the paper, that was the only word I didn't know. So when I got home, I Googled it and I was devastated to have the MDA website come up, and there was pictures of kiddos getting up the exact same way as my son. And so I have always been a person who sort of embraces denial and just stuffs it down and carries it on. I was kind of raised that way. And so I did. And so I waited a week, and I remember it was Thanksgiving. We went to Thanksgiving. Everybody was trying to be happy. And, family was discussing the fact that he might have autism. How'd the clinic go? What did they say? But I was secretly dying inside because I think I already knew. So when we walked in for the diagnosis, the doctor said, your son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he's going to stop walking between 8 and 10. He's going to go in a wheelchair around 10 to 12 or 8 to 10. I'm sorry. He's going to go into a wheelchair. When he stops walking, you'll need a wheelchair. And then his upper body will go and his heart and lungs will go, and you're going to lose him anywhere from 12 to 20. So I was in the music business at that time. We lived in Hollywood Hills, and both my husband and I were in the music industry. I was placing music in film and TV, which I loved, which was my passion. But I was also living that Hollywood lifestyle. I was going out and I was drinking a lot and partying and managing having kids, but just trying to juggle it all. And it was a sales job too. So there was a lot of pressure. And so everything kind of fell apart when he was diagnosed. And then they had to test Oliver because they said it came from the mother. And I already knew Oliver didn't have it because he was just doing everything so quickly that he didn't look anything like Anthony. So I kind of already knew. And of course, he didn't. So it started a journey. We ended up leaving California because it was so expensive to live. And actually, truth be told, I got fired at the Grammys because I just couldn't hold it together. I was just wasn't doing a good job at all. And I was just kind of a mess. And I really just wanted to focus on finding answers for Anthony. So we left to Arizona because we thought that maybe it would be less expensive and we would be able to take care of him there. So that was kind of the start into this disability world. Meanwhile, I still have not learned anything about ADHD. I have not acknowledged that I have that. And often used alcohol and, sometimes other substances to self-medicate and manage myself. And there was no problem with that. Everybody I knew in LA, the crowd, I should say, that I chose to run with, that was pretty common that everybody kind of partied. I was in the music scene. So I really didn't stand out too much as too crazy. But inside, and I won't go into the whole childhood thing too much, but I had a tough childhood. There were some great things about it too. But both my parents had addiction issues, and my mom had mental health issues. And I didn't know all that. So I always felt kind of lonely. I didn't really know why I felt lonely, why I felt isolated. And I compensated for a lot of that with just being sort of bossy or overbearing or maybe the life of the party. I mean, a lot of it was positive. It wasn't all negative, but I was a lot. I was just a lot, like many of us ADDers are. Um, but I didn't really understand myself. I just always was controlling or managing myself. My dad was a football coach, my mom was a teacher. I was just really taught to just keep it together. And every time things would fall apart in my life, which is a lot because I sought chaos a lot for that dopamine, and I got myself into a lot of situations that weren't healthy or weren't good for me. I kind of had a little bit low self-esteem. So I kind of aimed a little low on my goals and things that I went after because I just didn't think I deserved more. And the truth of the matter is I didn't come across that way. I came across with bravado and a big ego because oftentimes when we're really hurting and we don't feel good about ourselves, our ego is bigger because it's there to protect us. So that's how things started. So when Anthony got diagnosed, it's like throwing gasoline on the fire, right? I've already got mental health issues. I've already got addiction issues. I've already got a learning disability that I still didn't know about or understand. Um, and I had a lot of dysfunctional coping mechanisms. And I didn't know all that. I didn't really understand all that. I was too busy just trying to manage it and get through and get better. I always wanted to be better. So I always had that drive. But when Anthony got diagnosed, it got harder and harder to hide all that. And once we got to Arizona and I didn't know anyone, the thing about changing locations and when things are hard, moving, starting fresh, it's a great idea. But the problem is you take you with you. And so here I am in Arizona with this whole new life, and I'm still me. So, and we've still got all the issues that we've got. It didn't really solve any, and really things just kind of fell apart. The business we were trying to start fell apart. My marriage fell apart. Everything fell apart. And in that, some really great awakenings started happening. And the first step was getting sober. I got sober. Actually, yesterday was my 16th year anniversary without drinking. So I got sober from everything. And I started a program that taught me how to live without relying on those outside things to cope. And that was a great starting introduction into mental health. It was just a good way to start. I was always kind of like steps. I like structure. So if you told me what to do, I would just go follow the directions. I have a rebellious side too, of course, but that felt familiar to me. Like, here, do these steps, and this is what you'll get. And so I did, and it worked for a long time. It was, like I said, it was a great starting point. Doesn't work for everybody, but it definitely worked for me, and it helped me start looking at some of the shame that I was carrying around, and some of the other challenges that I had that were being covered up because I was medicating myself all the time. By this time, I had learned advocacy because I was helping Anthony with school. I learned behavior. I started being trained in behavior because I needed to manage my home front and a lot of kiddos with um, communication challenges, which could be autism. I mean, they call autism is really just communication issues, right? It's not necessarily an IQ issue. It certainly wasn't for my son. It was just a communication issue. But, behavior is communication. So if we can't communicate effectively, we're going to communicate maladaptively, which is how it comes out in behavior. So I started getting behavior training. I started learning about IEPs and 504s and helping figure out the school situation. I got a lot of help from a lot of people to do all that. Did a lot of interventions for him. He was actually patient number one in the first trial for Duchenne. So that became a whole few years of our life doing that. I mean, it was a lot. And because I was, going through a divorce and getting sober, I knew I was going to have to figure out how to take care of my family. Um, and what I was doing wasn't working. So I went back to school and I finished up my degree, my undergrad degree in psychology, because that was the track I had been on when I quit and got my job in the music business. And so I finished up my psychology track, and then I went on and got a master's in educational psychology, and I got a master's certification in behavior, applied behavioral analysis. So that became a whole nother career. So I started working for the Arizona State Department of Education, and I started helping manage disagreements between families and school districts. I learned a lot. I got my mediation certification. I got all kinds of other certifications in autism and social skills and siblings and all of the issues that surrounded Duchenne and autism and some of the other issues that I had to deal with personally. But I realized that if I'm going to learn all this, I might as well help other people. So it started me on this track of helping other people. So that was great. And I learned a lot and I cleaned a lot of things up becoming sober. But I found after years of being on that track, just something still felt missing. I still wasn't really entirely well. I would still emotionally, I was kind of all over the map. And I would blame Duchenne or my life. My life was really hard. Autism, Duchenne, helping so many people, working so hard, being a single mom. I mean, the list went on and on, right? So it wasn't until a few years later where I started realizing, first of all, in my master's program, um, might have been undergrad. I don't know. Either way, I figured out I had ADHD because we had to do testing. I had a whole class on doing psychoeducational testing. I think I did a clinical evaluation testing class too. Yeah. And that's where we all tested each other. And I really had all the symptoms for ADHD. Well, for me, that was amazing. I loved that information because it explained I mean, it explained so much about why I did what I did and how I lived the way that I lived and the choices that I made. It explained a lot and it was helpful. It made me feel better and it took away a little bit of the shame, realizing that I wasn't just a bad person or bad at these things. It was more about the fact that I was lacking, you know, I was lacking dopamine and I was chasing it every chance I got in maladaptive ways. And I had a lot of behaviors that I had created to try to navigate this disability. So what started happening is I remember, I'd been sober for quite a long time. And at first, I was super joyful and super happy and creating this new life for myself that was really good. And in spite of Duchenne and in spite of how challenging things were really good. And then years later, I sort of hit this wall because I just was angry and not really happy and really still struggling. And I kept working this program and doing all these other things and couldn't figure out, kind of what was going on. Like, why all of a sudden is just this not working anymore? You know, just like the drinking and that stuff wasn't working anymore. Now this stuff isn't really working anymore. And I sort of feel like I've hit a wall. And I remember one of my friends, it might have honestly even be the friend that you're going to see in the second episode. It very well could have been her. But she came to me and started talking to me about EMDR, I think, and trauma therapy. And sort of actually, she'd kind of rubbed me wrong because she would always try to turn things around when I was complaining all the time. And it would piss me off, quite frankly, because I was like, let me be in this. Like I'm supposed to be allowed to be in this. And so I started looking into EMDR and I'm this like on this self-help kick. And so I'm looking at this stuff and I remember sitting on my bed and we had a house full of kids and there was this like little free class that I got online or something and I was taking it. And it started having me like do some tapping, but ask some questions. And somehow I'll never forget, I led to this question like, you know, what's the payoff or why are you afraid to be happy? And from my behavior academic background and all the work I do with families, I know that every behavior has a function. So I connected that and was like, well, if I'm walking around miserable and I'm complaining and I'm kind of, emotionally chaotic, spouting off, getting angry here and there at people that didn't deserve it or whatever the story may be. And then I'd go help a bunch of people. So it was very, all over the place. But I remember thinking, well, there is a payoff to every behavior. You are either trying to get out of something or you are getting something. And I thought, well, getting out of something's kind of easy because I had known from my previous work of the step stuff that I didn't like responsibility. I didn't like all the responsibility I had, and sometimes I didn't want to do a hard thing. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. Even ADDers that could even be part of it because we like to do things we're passionate about that we like. We don't like to do the things we don't like. So it is harder. So that was easy. Okay, so what am I trying to avoid? That's simple. I'm trying to avoid the responsibility that it's going to take to make sure I'm taking care of myself. Like it was really easy to say, I don't have time to take care of myself. I'm taking care of all these kids. I'm helping all these families. I'm working. I'm supporting everything to make sure all the balls stay in the air and are okay. And that's not the truth. The truth is I didn't want to face myself and I didn't want to take the extra time it was going to take for me to get well. So I just kept pushing it off. But what was the payoff? Like, what was I getting out of it? And I'll never forget, I was sitting on the bed, I was closing my eyes doing some meditation thing. And it was asking enough questions. This little dumb program, this little free program was asking me like, well, what do you get out of it? And I remember thinking, well, what would it feel like to be happy? Like if I had no problems, if everything was okay, what would that look like? And I closed my eyes and I remember feeling really scared and super groundless. So I realized what the payoff was that, when people felt sorry for me, I didn't really think I wanted people to feel sorry for me, but just when people recognized how hard my life is and how hard it was for me to manage. I figured they'd be supportive. And if I looked happy and seemed like I had it all under control, people would go away. They wouldn't be around. And since loneliness was one of my biggest things in my childhood, I realized that I had a really profound sort of fear of that. So I started to realize that that's quite possibly what kept me in that state. And that sort of somehow, not consciously, obviously, but somehow, being a victim had kind of turned into my identity. My identity was really tied up in Duchenne, and my identity was tied up in, fighting and being an advocate. And I just realized that's like who I was, and that's not really who I wanted to just be, it didn't feel authentic, like that was the complete me. And so I guess I made a commitment and realized that I needed to get some other help. So I started doing some other additional therapy, and I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and I did some talk therapy, although I soon learned that talk therapy wasn't necessarily really good for trauma because, talking about it over and over was already my issue. Like it wasn't solving it. It was just reiterating to my brain that this was really hard and I was kind of a victim, even though I didn't like using that verbiage. And if you asked me, I would say, no way is that me. But that's really what all my behavior was looking like. Just the constant drama of things being wrong and focusing on all the problems I had and sighing and being exhausted and just being impatient and frustrated. That's basically all that behavior added up. So I had to figure out how to break the habit, and I realized I was just addicted to that old story. Like that old story was like supporting who I was, and who was I going to be if I didn't have that? And so I started realizing, I could be a happy person and things could be okay. And I guess if that made people feel I didn't need support and that's the only reason they were in my life, was to feel needed. I guess I was going to have to make new relationships, And so I did some therapy. I did a lot of writing, and I, really just focused on taking care of myself. I tried a lot of different modalities and things that we could talk about in another session for sure. And I didn't. It was almost like, I know this is going to sound really crazy, but it was almost like a withdrawal, just like when I had quit substances, because I was so, stuck on that story and that identity that I felt really insecure without it. And I felt really like I was just sort of flailing. It felt very groundless. So it felt pretty uncomfortable, but obviously, that's where discomfort's where we grow, unfortunately. And so that discomfort ended up being really good. And I started, I would always talk about my ADHD and talk about all these things. I still do, but I do it now because I'm not ashamed of it. And I do it now so that if there's other people out there that maybe don't know they have it because they're older and we didn't get diagnosed back then, or are afraid to ask for support, I want to make sure that people always know they can come to me and talk to me about that. But I don't say it anymore because I think I'm broken. Like for a long time, naming all those things that was wrong with me, um, was my way to reiterate that story that I was broken. And it took me a while to go, well, if I'm not broken, I don't need someone to come in and fix me. And then I should probably stop waiting for someone to save me. And that was when I got to the core, like, crap, that's what it is. I just want somebody to save me from this. I don't want to do the work. I do enough. I'm exhausted. I just want someone to come save me. And all that behavior was not having anybody come save me. It was just driving people away because they could understand why I was having a hard time, but who wants to be around that, right? So I started really alienating the healthy people that I really should have around me to help support me. Um, and actually, I just attracted a lot of other people that were like me, and so it took a while to make that change. Once I had that realization, it took a while to sort of change that, break that habit. And I'm still working on it. I still slip back into it because that was my mode of operation for most of my life. So it's not going to go away. I mean, I'm literally programmed for that. So I still slip back into that. But now I recognize that and I see it and I go, okay, well, that doesn't work. It doesn't get the love and the support I need. It's not effective. And it alienates me even further. And it makes me focus on all the things that are really hard instead of focusing on anything that's beautiful or joyful. And so I started to just really kind of work on that. And it's a work in progress. Again, I'm still working on it, right? I never want to sound like I have it all figured out because I take a bunch of steps forward and then I take a few back and then I take a few forward. And I just hope I keep slowly making progress, but it is non-linear. That is for sure. So my life on the other side of this kind of realization, I started to want to be around people that were healthy. I wanted to be around people that were happy. I wanted to be myself again. I started thinking about, well, who was I? When I was a little girl, I used to be, I used to like run around barefoot, and we had this cabin up north and it was on a lake in Michigan. And I grew up going up there because my parents were teachers, so we'd spend summers up there. And so I tried to get back to like who was I before all this stuff, all this programming that happened and the things that happened to me and the protections that I built. And I would think about this little girl running around barefoot, running up to the store to get candy. I still love candy. I still love sugar. It's really bad. And playing with the frogs in the swamp and pulling frogs out of the swamp and playing with them and playing with my summer friends, running up and down the beach and burying ourselves up to the neck in sand, making sand castles, learning how to, sail on a sailboat. I love dancing. I love music. I love music festivals. I love meeting new people. I love traveling. I love going on adventures. I love hiking and kayaking. And I really hadn't done any of those things. Skiing, I grew up skiing. And after I had Anthony and he couldn't ski, or so I thought, he skis now, believe it or not. He does an adaptive ski program. But at that time, I thought, oh, he's not really going to be able to ski the way that I skied. So I stopped skiing. I stopped skiing for like 20 years. Like I just gave up everything that made me me. And getting on the other side, when I finally made a commitment to not be addicted to that identity and that old story and not stay in that victim mode and let that go, even if it was scary, even if, I felt more alone, I was going to go ahead and do that. And now on the other side, I've got room, and I've got room to hold different things. I can hold two things at once. I can hold being sad and I can hold being joyful at the same time now. I have capacity for that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like you'll find out a little bit in this series that all or nothing thinking is very common in our brain when we've had trauma. And it also happens with ADDers too. So that all or nothing thinking is really, really prevalent in my life. And so I just thought, everything is bad or everything is really happy. And that's how it was. And I'm just really trying to learn to hold both. Things are a little bit of both. Things are messy. the messy middle. And that's why I called it that, because I just think that there's still joy with grief. There's still joy with frustration. There's still joy with, feeling sad or being scared or being fearful about things in the future, and there's space for both and it's okay. And I want to work on being a whole person, and talking about mental health supports. I'm on medication. I have been. It works really well for me. I get therapy. I do trauma therapy. I go to meetings sometimes when I need them. I talk to my girlfriends. I talk to other moms in the rare disease community that help build me up. And then I don't talk about it. And I go and I paddleboard, or I go dancing at a music festival, or I go, do something for myself, like a crafting or a puzzle or just anything. So I've got all of it instead of one thing or the other. And I've realized over time that the more flexible my brain is, the more mentally healthy I am. And when I start getting rigid and stuck, it's a sign that I need support for my mental health. And I just want to make it not a bad conversation. Like, I'm tired of it being a bad thing. And I recognize people now that are really hurting, that have really big egos, I recognize when I talk to people and they're really defensive, because I was really defensive. I still can be. When I feel that guard coming up, I know exactly what it's from. It's from my learning disability, because I'm trying to cover that up, or it's because I'm afraid of what you'll think, so I've got to be right. I mean, there's all these crazy behaviors that we have and create when those core things are not figured out and not healed. And so I have learned, or I'm learning, I should say, the more that I've healed, the more that everyone around me heals. And, the last thing I want to say is that, I'm working on writing. I'm a writer, as some people know. They've read blogs or whatever. I'm working on a book, and my focus is, I call us ADDers, or our sensitive people, like we are, the canaries. They're like the canaries in the coal mine. I actually got that from another writer. I didn't make that up, but I like that analogy because, we're seen in society like we have to fix something, like we have to be like everybody else, and society is a really tough place when you're sensitive. It's really, really hard. And back in the old days, if you look back, especially with women and even men, the ones that were sensitive, the ones that had all the gifts that come with what we now call mental health issues, or ADHD, or anxiety, OCD, like all of these things that we now have to have labels for. Back in most cultures, those were the healers. Those were the people that, when they saw them being that sensitive when they were young, instead of trying to fix them, they became the healers of society. And in a roundabout way, every time I look at any of the helping professions, that's what I see. I see people in the helping professions that are sensitive people that probably struggled trying to fit in, and probably had some, challenges feeling healthy and feeling whole and feeling healed. So I just don't look at it anymore like we're broken. We're not. And I don't look at it like it's situational. I don't have all these issues because of Duchenne. Duchenne made it harder. Some of the other challenges in my life, or challenges with my other child, or my friends, or my family, or my memory of some of the not so good things that have happened to me throughout my lifetime, those all contribute, but they're not the reason. I had to get beyond all of that and beyond all the stories and figure it out. And I'm kind of figuring it out. I'm definitely happier, definitely more balanced, and it will be a work in progress. So that kind of concludes the first episode. I talk too much, but I wanted to start this podcast series out by, putting it all out there. and making it okay to have these conversations. And I do these reels, or I'm being encouraged to do these reels, and I don't like them. They feel really weird and I don't know what to say. And so we just decided that what I'm going to do on those reels is answer questions. So from now on, going forward, we're going to take questions from these podcasts that you type in the comments, and we're going to make reels to answer questions. Or, something like this, you might not have questions because, I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not an expert on you. I only know my own situation, and I'm sharing my strength and my hope and my story. But comments, so that we could have a discussion. I just think that, if you're online, let's make it engaged, and let's focus on commonalities rather than differences, like so much of what's going on out there. I'd like to have a safer, healthier place to have conversations. So thank you very much. And I hope you're encouraged to go on to the second episode. We talk about a lot of cool things beyond the bubble bath with again, my friend who's a therapist. We talk about self-abandonment and some of those other things that we need to think about in how we should take care of ourselves. And then again, the third episode is going to be amazing as well. And that gets into the nitty-gritty of some of the stuff that we talked about today, and how to actually really start getting yourself well and ready to live your best life, so your kids and everybody can see you living your best life. So that's all I have. Heal yourself, you'll heal those around you, and we all have the right to be happy. So with that, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Thanks for being here with me on Talks Too Much. If today's episode helped you see things a little clearer, or you feel a little less alone, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget, have faith that struggles you're in will soon be your strength. I'll see you next time.